Jasmine knew she was in trouble the second the guards walked in first. Two men in black suits scanned the emergency room like they were sweeping for threats, their eyes cold and professional, hands resting near their waists in a way that made Jasmine's stomach drop. Then he entered, and the entire ER seemed to hold its breath. Expensive black suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her resident salary. Dark hair swept back. Cold, assessing eyes that tracked every person, every exit, every potential danger. And beside him, an elegant Korean woman in her 60s, conscious but clearly in pain, clutching her wrist while he held her other arm with infinite gentleness. Rita, the charge nurse who'd seen everything in 20 years, grabbed Jasmine's elbow hard enough to bruise. "That's Gene Park," she whispered urgently, her voice tight with something that sounded like fear. "Treat the mother. Be professional. Do not make eye contact with him. Get them in and out as fast as possible." But it was already too late, because his eyes found Jasmine's across the crowded ER, and she watched something shift in his expression. Something that looked like recognition, even though they'd never met. Something that looked like hunger. His gaze locked onto her face, traveled down to the ID badge clipped to her scrubs, back up to her eyes. Intense. Unblinking. Like she was the only person in the entire hospital. His mother said something in Korean, looking between her son and Jasmine. He responded without breaking eye contact, his voice low, and whatever he said made his mother smile despite her pain. And then they were walking toward her, and Jasmine couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except stand there as Gene Park brought his injured mother directly to her station. "My mother fell," he said, his voice surprisingly soft but carrying an edge of command that made it clear he expected immediate action. "She needs to be seen now." Not a request. A statement. If you're already hooked and want to know what happens when a mafia boss decides you're exactly what he's been searching for, smash that like button right now and drop a comment telling me if you'd run or stay. Subscribe because this story is about to get intense, and you don't want to miss a single moment of Jasmine's dangerous journey into Gene Park's world. Now, back to that night when everything changed. Jasmine forced herself into professional mode, even though her hands wanted to shake. "Of course. Let me get you into an examination room immediately." She grabbed a tablet, acutely aware that he was still staring at her, that his eyes hadn't left her face since the moment he'd walked in. She could feel the weight of that gaze like a physical touch, making her skin prickle with awareness. She led them to examination room 4, hyper-conscious of Gene walking behind her, his presence commanding even in silence. The two guards took positions outside the door, and Jasmine caught the nervous glances from other staff members. Everyone knew who he was except her, apparently, and their fear was contagious. Inside the exam room, Jasmine helped Mrs. Park onto the table, trying to ignore the way Gene positioned himself where he could watch both his mother and Jasmine simultaneously. His eyes tracked every movement she made, the way she helped his mother settle, how gently she touched the injured wrist, the soft tone she used when asking questions. "Can you tell me what happened, Mrs. Park?" Jasmine asked, pulling up the intake form. "I fell down the stairs at my son's home," Mrs. Park said, her English accented but clear. "Stupid old woman. Not watching where I'm going." "Mom, don't," Gene said sharply, then softened his tone. "It wasn't your fault. The lighting was bad." He spoke to his mother in rapid Korean, and she responded in kind, reaching up to pat his cheek with her good hand. The gesture was so tender, so at odds with the dangerous man everyone seemed terrified of, that Jasmine felt something shift in her chest. "I'm going to examine your wrist and check your ribs," Jasmine said, moving closer. "Can you rate your pain for me, 1 to 10? "Maybe 6, Mrs. Park said. 8. Gene corrected immediately, his voice firm. "She never complains. She'll tell you she's fine when she's not. Whatever she says, it's worse." His eyes met Jasmine's, and there was something desperate in them, something that looked like barely controlled fear. "Please," he added, and that single word sounded like it cost him something. "Take care of her." The vulnerability in his voice, the raw need, hit Jasmine harder than any threat could have. This wasn't just a powerful man used to giving orders. This was a son terrified for his mother, trying to maintain control when everything inside him was screaming panic. "I will," Jasmine promised, meaning it with every fiber of her being. "I'll take excellent care of her." Something flickered across Jin's face, relief, gratitude, something else she couldn't name. His mother was watching them both with sharp, intelligent eyes, and a small smile played at her lips. "You're very beautiful," Mrs. Park said suddenly to Jasmine, and Jin's jaw tightened. And you have gentle hands. Kind eyes. Jean, don't you think she has kind eyes? Mom, Jean said, a warning in his voice, but his ears had turned slightly red.
What?
I'm just making conversation. Mrs. Park's smile grew. My son notices these things too. I saw him staring at you from the moment we walked in. Jasmine felt heat crawl up her neck, and she deliberately focused on examining Mrs. Park's wrist, trying to maintain professional composure even though her heart was doing something erratic against her ribs. She could feel Jin's eyes still on her, burning into her, and when she risked a glance at him, he didn't look away, didn't apologize, just held her gaze with an intensity that made her breath catch. I'm going to need you to step outside while we help your mother change into a gown, Jasmine said, her voice not quite steady. Dr. Chin will be in shortly to do the full examination. She expected resistance. Men like him, powerful, used to control, didn't like being told what to do. But Jean nodded immediately, leaning down to kiss his mother's forehead and murmur something in Korean that made her smile. When he straightened and turned toward the door, he paused beside Jasmine. He was close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle, and feel the heat radiating from him. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper, meant only for her. Thank you for being kind to her, he said, his breath warm against her ear. Most people are only kind because they're afraid. But you're different. I can tell. Then he was gone, leaving Jasmine standing there with her pulse racing and her professional composure in tatters. Mrs. Park was watching her with knowing eyes, still smiling that mischievous smile. My Jean, he doesn't look at people like that, Mrs. Park said as Jasmine helped her out of her silk blouse, revealing dark bruising already blooming across her ribs. He looks at everyone like they're a threat or a tool. But you? He looks at you like you're precious. Like you're something he wants to protect. Mrs. Park, let's focus on getting you comfortable, Jasmine said, trying to redirect, but her hands were trembling slightly as she helped the older woman into a hospital gown. You're nervous, Mrs. Park observed. Because of my son?
Don't be.
Jean would never hurt someone good. He only becomes dangerous when protecting what matters to him. She reached out with her good hand and squeezed Jasmine's. And I think you might matter to him already, even though he just met you. Isn't that strange? Fate works in mysterious ways. Through the frosted glass of the examination room door, Jasmine could see Jin's shadow. He was pacing back and forth, like a caged predator. He hadn't even gone to the waiting room. Just stayed right outside, close enough to hear if something went wrong, close enough to get to his mother in seconds if needed. Dr. Chin arrived and conducted the examination with practiced efficiency, while Jasmine assisted, documenting everything. X-rays showed a sprained wrist and 2 bruised ribs, painful but not serious, nothing that wouldn't heal with rest and time. When Dr. Chin delivered the news and Jean was allowed back in, Jasmine watched his entire body sag with relief. His hands shook slightly as he reached for his mother, brushing her hair back from her face with infinite tenderness. 2 weeks rest, Dr. Chin instructed. Ice the ribs, elevate the wrist. I'll have the nurse give you discharge instructions and a prescription for pain medication. After Dr. Chin left, Jasmine stepped forward with the medication information and care instructions. Jin's attention immediately shifted to her, that intense focus that made her feel like she was the only thing in his universe. The pain medication can be taken every 4 to 6 hours as needed, Jasmine explained, hyper-aware of how close he was standing, how his eyes never left her face. Most importantly, your mother needs rest. No lifting, no stairs if possible, no strenuous activity for at least a week. She'll rest, Jean said, and there was steel in his voice. I'll make sure of it. She'll have round-the-clock care. Mrs. Park said something sharp in Korean, and Jean responded in the same language, his tone firm but gentle. A rapid back and forth ensued, with Mrs. Park clearly arguing and Jean standing his ground. Finally, Mrs. Park huffed and turned to Jasmine. My son thinks I'm made of glass now, she complained. He wants to hire nurses to watch me sleep. I tell him this is ridiculous, but he doesn't listen. He never listens when he's decided to worry. I always listen, Jean corrected quietly. I just don't always agree. And this time, you're going to do what I say because you scared 10 years off my life tonight. The raw emotion in his voice made Jasmine's chest tight. She'd seen plenty of worried family members, but there was something different about Jin's fear. Something that went bone deep, Like losing his mother would shatter the last piece of humanity he had left. Before you go, Jasmine said impulsively, let me wrap that wrist properly. The temporary wrap from X-ray isn't supportive enough. She gathered the proper bandaging materials and carefully, gently, wrapped Mrs. Park's wrist. She was aware with every nerve ending that Jean was watching her hands, watching the way she touched his mother with such care. When she finished and secured the wrap with clips, Mrs. Park caught her hand and held it. Thank you, sweet girl, Mrs. Park said warmly. You have a gift. Not just for medicine, but for caring. That's rarer than you think. It's just my job, Jasmine said, but Mrs. Park shook her head.
No.
A job is what you do. This is who you are. She looked at her son. Jean, tell her. Tell her properly. Jean stepped closer, and Jasmine had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. Up close, she could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the silver threading through his temples, the exhaustion etched in lines around his mouth. He looked like a man who carried the weight of the world and never put it down. Thank you, he said, his voice low and rough. For taking care of her. For being gentle when you didn't have to be. For treating her like a person, not like... He paused, seeming to struggle with words. Just thank you. It means more than you know. You're welcome. Jasmine managed, her throat tight. As they left, Mrs. Park walking slowly with Jin's arms supporting her, the older woman turned back. We'll see you again, Jasmine. I'm sure of it. It sounded less like a hope and more like a promise. Rita appeared at Jasmine's elbow the second they were out of sight. Girl, what just happened? Do you know who that was? That was Jean Park. As in Park Enterprises. As in the Korean mob. As in the man who runs half the illegal operations on the East Coast. The words hit Jasmine like ice water.
Mob.
Criminal operations. Suddenly the guards, the fear, the expensive suit, Rita's warning. It all clicked into terrible clarity. And he looked at you, Rita continued, her voice urgent, like he wanted to devour you. Jasmine, you need to be careful. Men like that are dangerous. They're not normal. They don't date, they possess. They don't love, they consume. Jasmine's hands were shaking as she updated the patient file. Rita was right. She should forget about Jean Park and his intense stare and his gentle hands on his mother. Should pretend tonight never happened. But 3 days later, when Mrs. Park returned for follow-up appointment, Jasmine knew forgetting was impossible. The moment she saw them in the waiting area, her heart kicked against her ribs. Jean stood immediately, his eyes finding hers across the room with that same devastating intensity. Mrs. Park's face lit up like she'd just seen her favorite person in the world, and she waved enthusiastically despite her wrapped wrist. Dr. Morrison, Jasmine's supervisor, appeared beside her. Mrs. Park specifically requested you for her follow-up. She told the scheduling desk that only you could examine her, that she trusted you. Dr. Morrison's eyes were sharp, assessing. Do you know these people, Jasmine? I treated her in the ER 3 nights ago, Jasmine said carefully. Sprained wrist, bruised ribs. Dr. Morrison's gaze flicked to Jean, to the expensive suit, to the way he was watching Jasmine. Be professional. Be thorough. And be careful. That last part sounded less like medical advice and more like a warning. Jasmine led them to an examination room, acutely aware of Jean walking behind her, of the weight of his attention on her back. Inside the room, Mrs. Park immediately launched into cheerful conversation. I've been thinking about you, she announced. Telling Jean what a wonderful doctor you are. How gentle, how kind. He agrees, don't you, Jean? Jin's jaw tightened, but he nodded. I agree. He's been worried about me constantly, Mrs. Park continued, settling onto the examination table, hovering like I might break. I told him, Jean, the nice doctor said 2 weeks rest, not 2 weeks of you acting like I'm dying. But does he listen? I listen, Jean said quietly, but his eyes were on Jasmine, not his mother. I just choose to be cautious. Jasmine forced herself to focus on the examination, checking the healing bruises, testing range of motion in the wrist, palpating the ribs carefully. Everything was healing beautifully, exactly as expected. But she was hyper-conscious of Jin's gaze tracking her every movement, the way his body tensed whenever his mother winced, the barely controlled energy radiating from him. You're healing perfectly, Jasmine said, making notes on the tablet. The bruising is fading, the swelling in your wrist is down significantly. Keep doing what you're doing, rest, ice, elevation. Another week, and you should be almost back to normal. See, Mrs. Park said triumphantly to her son. I told you I'm fine. You worry for nothing. I'll always worry, Jean said, and there was something raw in his voice. It's my job to worry about you. It's all I have. The loneliness in those words made Jasmine's chest ache. She looked up and found him staring at her again, but this time there was something vulnerable in his expression, something that looked like he was silently begging her to understand what he couldn't say out loud. Mrs. Park was watching them both, her eyes moving between them with obvious satisfaction. Jasmine, she said suddenly, do you like Korean food? Yes, I do, Jasmine said, caught off guard by the abrupt change of subject. Wonderful. You should join us for lunch after this. There's a lovely restaurant nearby. Best bibimbap in the city. Jean will take us. Mrs. Park, that's very kind, but I have other appointments. She's off at 2 p.m., Jean said quietly, and Jasmine's head whipped around to stare at him. How do you know that? Jean met her eyes steadily, not a trace of apology in his expression. I asked. I wanted to know when I could see you again without disrupting your work. The admission hung in the air between them, charged with implication. He'd asked about her schedule. He'd deliberately found out when she was free. This wasn't coincidence or politeness. This was intentional, calculated, purposeful. Are you feeling the tension? Drop a comment and tell us what you think Jasmine should do. Run from this dangerous man or take a chance on something that could destroy her. And hit that subscribe button, because what happens next will change everything. Mrs. Park clapped her hands together, delighted. Perfect. It's fate, you see. You finish at 2, we'll be done here by then, and we can all have a nice meal together. Jean, tell her it's just lunch. Just a thank you for taking such good care of me. Jasmine should say no. Every instinct, every ounce of common sense, every warning from Rita was screaming at her to refuse. Jean Park was dangerous. He ran criminal operations. He was part of a world that had nothing to do with hers, a world that could swallow her whole and spit out the bones. But she looked at Mrs. Park's hopeful face, at the genuine warmth in her eyes. Looked at Jean, at the carefully controlled expression that didn't quite hide the desperate hope underneath. Saw the way he'd gone still, like her answer mattered more than anything else in the world. One lunch, Jasmine heard herself say, the words coming out before she could stop them. Just to say thank you for being such a gracious patient. But I need to be clear, this can't become a regular thing. Professional boundaries exist for a reason. Mrs. Park's smile was radiant. Of course, of course. Just one lunch. Just today. No pressure. No expectations. But the look in Jin's eyes told a different story. The way his shoulders relaxed, the way something fierce and possessive flashed across his face before he locked it down, that told Jasmine this man had no intention of one lunch being the end of anything. This was a beginning, and they both knew it. I'll be outside the main entrance at 2, Jean said, his voice low and intense. I'll wait as long as it takes. After they left, Jasmine's hands were shaking so badly she had to set down the tablet. What was she doing? This was insane. She didn't even know these people, not really. Didn't know what Jean did, what he was capable of, what getting involved with him might cost. Her next patient was a motorcycle accident victim, then a child with a suspected broken arm, then an elderly woman with pneumonia. She threw herself into work, trying to lose herself in the familiar rhythm of diagnose, treat, document. But at 1:55 p.m., she found herself in the staff bathroom, changing out of her scrubs into the spare jeans and fitted black top she kept in her locker. She stared at her reflection, at her braids pulled back into a neat bun, at the nervous energy in her eyes. You're being stupid, she told herself. Monumentally, catastrophically stupid. But at 2 p.m., she walked out of the main entrance anyway, and there he was. Jean was leaning against a black Mercedes that looked like it cost more than her student loans, and he straightened the moment he saw her. He wasn't wearing a suit this time, just dark jeans and a black button-down that somehow made him look even more dangerous, more real. His eyes tracked her approach with that same hungry intensity, and when she reached him, he smiled. It was small, barely there, but it transformed his entire face. You came, he said, like he'd genuinely been afraid she wouldn't. I said I would, Jasmine replied, trying to ignore the way her pulse was racing. Where's your mother? She decided to stay home and rest. Said her ribs were bothering her. Jin's smile grew slightly. She's lying. She wanted to give us time alone. The admission should have made Jasmine turn around and walk away. Instead, she found herself asking, So this was a setup? Yes.
No επάλεγη, no deflection.
Just honest admission. My mother likes you. I like you. We both wanted to know if you'd give me a chance to take you to lunch. Just us. Jasmine crossed her arms, trying to maintain some sense of control, even though her heart was doing backflips. You should know I Googled you last night. Park enterprises. Import-export. Real estate. Entertainment venues. Very impressive, very legitimate looking. On the surface, Jean said quietly. You want to know what's underneath? Rita already told me. Korean mob. Organized crime. Operations that aren't legal. Jasmine met his eyes directly. Is she right? Jean was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he gestured to the car.
Get in.
I'll tell you everything. And then you can decide if you still want to have lunch with me, or if you want me to drive you home and never contact you again. It was the worst idea Jasmine had ever had. Getting into a car with a man who'd just admitted to being part of organized crime. But there was something in his eyes, something raw and honest, that made her trust him despite every logical reason not to. She got in the car. Jean drove in silence for several minutes, navigating through city traffic with practiced ease. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and controlled. My father built an empire on both legal and illegal operations. When I was 19, a rival organization killed him to send a message. My mother begged me to walk away, to go to college like I'd planned, to have a normal life. But if I'd walked away, they would have killed her too. Killed my sister. Taken everything my father built and destroyed everyone who depended on us for protection. He paused at a red light, his hands tight on the steering wheel. So I took over. I was 19 years old, and suddenly I was responsible for hundreds of people, their families, their livelihoods, their lives. I've spent 15 years building what my father started, protecting what matters, making impossible choices. What kind of choices? Jasmine asked quietly. Jin's laugh was bitter. The kind that keep me awake at night. The kind that make me wonder if I'm still human, or if I've become the monster everyone thinks I am. He turned to look at her, and there was such raw pain in his eyes that Jasmine's breath caught. I've hurt people, Jasmine. I've done things I can never take back, never wash clean. I'm not a good man. I stopped being good the day I decided survival mattered more than morality. Then why tell me any of this? Jasmine asked. Why not just pretend to be a normal businessman and hope I never find out? Because you deserve the truth. Because if there's any chance of something real between us, it has to start with honesty. Jean pulled into a parking spot near a small Korean restaurant tucked into a quiet street. He turned off the engine and faced her fully. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you touched my mother's hand with such gentleness. Do you know how rare that is? To see someone treat another person with genuine kindness, not because they're afraid or because they want something, but just because it's who they are? His voice dropped lower, more intense. When you looked at me in that hospital, you didn't see a criminal or a monster or someone to fear. You just saw a man scared for his mother. You saw me as human. I haven't felt human in 15 years, Jasmine. But when I'm near you, when you look at me, I remember what it feels like to be more than just duty and violence and impossible choices. Jasmine's throat was tight. She should be terrified. Should demand he take her home right now. Instead, she found herself reaching out, placing her hand over his where it gripped the steering wheel. His skin was warm, his knuckles scarred in ways that told stories she probably didn't want to know. I'm scared, she admitted. Of you, of this, of what getting involved with you might mean for my life, my career, everything I've worked for. You should be scared, Jean said roughly. You should run as far from me as possible. I'm dangerous, Jasmine. The people in my world are dangerous. I can't promise you safety or normalcy, or any of the things you deserve. Then what can you promise me? Jean turned his hand over, threading his fingers through hers. Honesty. Always. Even when it's ugly. Even when it hurts. I'll never lie to you. Never hide what I am or what I do. And I'll protect you with everything I have. Anyone who tries to hurt you will have to go through me first, and I promise you, they won't make it. The fierce protectiveness in his voice sent shivers down Jasmine's spine. This was insane. This was dangerous. This was the worst decision she could possibly make. One lunch, she said finally. Let's start there and see what happens. The restaurant was small and intimate, tucked away from the main street like a secret. The moment they walked in, Jasmine saw the same reaction she'd witnessed at the hospital. The owner's eyes went wide, his posture straightened, and he immediately started speaking rapid Korean while bowing slightly. Jean responded in a quieter tone, and they were led to a private booth in the back, away from the handful of other diners. "They're afraid of you," Jasmine observed once they were seated. "Yes," Jean said simply. "Most people are." "Does that bother you?" "It used to." He met her eyes across the table. "Now, it's just reality. Fear keeps people safe. Fear keeps them from making stupid mistakes that get them killed." The owner brought them tea and immediately started bringing out dishes without them having to order. Banchan, kimchi, grilled meats, steaming bowls of soup. Everything looked and smelled incredible, but Jasmine's stomach was in knots. "Tell me about you," Jean said, pouring her tea with careful precision. "I've told you my darkest truths. I want to know yours. Not the doctor things. Real things. What do you dream about? What keeps you awake at night?" So Jasmine talked about growing up in Atlanta with her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was 8. About watching her grandfather die from diabetes complications because they couldn't afford proper health care, and how that day had shaped everything she'd become. About the crushing weight of student loans and the exhaustion of residency and the small victories that made it all worthwhile. The child who smiled after getting stitches, the elderly woman who cried with relief when the chest pain wasn't a heart attack. "I dream about having my own practice someday," she admitted. "In underserved communities, where people need help the most. I dream about making a difference, about being the doctor my grandfather needed but never had." Jean listened with complete attention, his eyes never leaving her face. "You will," he said with absolute certainty. "You'll achieve everything you're working toward. I can see it in you. That determination, that purpose. You're going to change lives, Jasmine." "What about you?" she asked. "What do you dream about? Or have you forgotten how?" Something flickered across his face. Pain, longing, something that looked like grief for a life he'd never have. "I dream about my sister having a normal life. Getting married, having children, never having to know the things I know or do the things I've done. I dream about my mother being safe, being happy, not having to worry that every phone call might be someone telling her I'm dead." He paused, his jaw working. "And lately, I've been dreaming about what it would feel like to be with someone who sees past all of this, past the violence and the fear and the empire, to whatever's left of the person I used to be." The vulnerability in his voice cracked something open in Jasmine's chest. She reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the scars on his knuckles, the calluses that spoke of violence she didn't want to imagine. "I see you," she said quietly. "The man who holds his mother's hand like she's his anchor to humanity. The man who worries himself sick over the people he loves. The man who's scared and lonely and trying so hard to be strong for everyone else that he's forgotten how to be gentle with himself." Jin's grip tightened on her hand, and she saw his throat work as he swallowed hard. "Jasmine, if we do this, if we try to make something work between us, it won't be easy. There will be people who try to use you to get to me. There will be nights I can't tell you where I am or what I'm doing. There will be moments when you'll hate what I am and what I do." "I know," Jasmine said, even though the words terrified her. "And you still want to try?" She should say no. Should stand up right now and walk away from this beautiful, dangerous man who looked at her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. Should protect her career, her future, her carefully planned life. Instead, she squeezed his hand and said, "I want to try." The smile that broke across Jin's face was devastating, genuine and warm, and so full of hope that it made Jasmine's heart ache. For the next hour, they ate and talked, and Jasmine discovered that beneath the cold exterior was someone funny and intelligent and surprisingly thoughtful. He told her about learning to cook from his mother, about the books he read when he couldn't sleep, about the small things that brought him joy in a life dominated by darkness. When Jean drove her home later, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He pulled up outside her modest apartment building and turned to face her, his expression serious. "I meant what I said about honesty," he told her. "So, I need you to know, there's already someone watching you. One of my men. He'll make sure you're safe, that no one from my world tries to use you as leverage against me." Jasmine's stomach dropped. "Someone's watching me? Since when?" "Since the moment I realized I wanted you in my life." Jin's voice was steady, unapologetic. "I know it sounds controlling, and maybe it is. But in my world, the people I care about become targets. I won't risk your safety, Jasmine. Not ever. She should be angry, should feel violated by this invasion of her privacy. But looking at his face, at the fierce protectiveness there, she understood. This was how he loved, completely, obsessively, with a single-minded focus on keeping his people safe. Okay, she said finally, but I want to meet him. This person watching me. If someone's going to follow me around, I should at least know who they are. Jean nodded slowly. Tomorrow. I'll introduce you. And Jasmine. He reached out and cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing across her cheek. Thank you. For giving me a chance. For not running when you should have. For seeing something in me worth knowing. Then he leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft, achingly gentle. Nothing like the dangerous man he was supposed to be. It tasted like possibility and danger, and the promise of something that could either save them both or destroy everything. When he pulled back, Jasmine's heart was racing, her lips tingling, her entire body aware of him in ways that scared and thrilled her in equal measure. Good night, Jasmine, Jean said softly. Good night, Jean. She got out of the car and walked to her building, feeling his eyes on her the whole way. When she reached her door and turned back, he was still there, watching, waiting until she was safely inside. Only then did the Mercedes pull away. Inside her apartment, Jasmine leaned against the door and closed her eyes. What had she just agreed to? What kind of life was she walking into? Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Sleep well. Dream of possibilities, not fears. Tomorrow, we start figuring out how to make this work. Jean. She saved the number and responded. Tomorrow. But Jean? No more secrets. If we're doing this, I need to know everything. His response came immediately. Everything. I promise. Even the parts that will make you want to run. Because you deserve to know exactly who you're choosing. Jasmine set her phone down and moved to her window. Across the street, she could see a dark SUV parked under a streetlight. Her bodyguard, presumably. The person whose job was to keep her safe from a world she was only beginning to understand. She should be terrified. Should be calling Rita, calling her grandmother, calling someone who could talk sense into her. Instead, she felt alive in a way she'd never experienced before. Like she'd been sleepwalking through her carefully planned life and had suddenly woken up to find something real, something dangerous, something worth fighting for. The next morning, Jean texted her an address and a time. When Jasmine arrived at the upscale coffee shop, he was already there, and beside him was a young woman in her 20s with kind eyes and Jin's same elegant features. Jasmine, this is my sister, Jiyoung, Jean said. I wanted you to meet her, to understand what I'm trying to protect, why I do what I do. Jiyoung smiled warmly and embraced Jasmine like they were old friends. My brother hasn't stopped talking about you, she said. The beautiful doctor, who sees him as human. I had to meet the woman who made my brother smile for the first time in years. Over coffee, Jasmine learned that Jiyoung was a teacher, that she volunteered at a community center, that she lived a completely normal life because Jean had built walls around her to keep the darkness at bay. She learned that everything Jean did, every impossible choice, every violent act, every morally gray decision, was to protect the people he loved. He's not perfect, Jiyoung said quietly while Jean was at the counter getting more coffee. He's done things that would horrify you. But he's also the man who worked 3 jobs to pay for my college education. Who sat with me every night when I had nightmares after our father died. Who built an empire just to make sure our family would never be vulnerable again. Whatever you decide about him, I hope you'll remember that underneath everything, he's just a man trying to keep his family safe. When Jean returned, Jasmine looked at him, really looked at him, and saw all the layers. The dangerous crime lord. The devoted son and brother. The lonely man desperate for connection. The person who carried impossible weight and never put it down. I want to know everything, she said. Your business, your operations, the dangers I'm walking into. If I'm going to be part of your life, I need full transparency. Jean nodded slowly. Tonight. Come to my house. I'll show you everything, the legitimate businesses, the illegal ones, the people I protect, the enemies I fight. And then you can make your final decision about whether this is something you can live with. So, here's what I need to know from you. Would you walk into a crime lord's world for a chance at something real? Would you risk everything for love that could destroy you? Drop your answer in the comments, smash that like button if this story has you hooked, and subscribe because Jasmine's journey into Jin's dangerous world is just beginning. That evening, Jasmine stood outside Jin's home and understood for the first time the true scope of his world. The estate was massive, sprawling grounds, security gates, guards stationed at every entrance. This wasn't just wealth. This was power. This was a fortress. Jin met her at the door himself, and she could see the tension in his shoulders, the fear in his eyes that this would be the moment she walked away forever. "Come in," he said quietly. "My mother's been cooking all afternoon. She's convinced food will make this easier." Inside, the house was beautiful but surprisingly warm. Family photos on the walls, comfortable furniture, the smell of home-cooked Korean food filling the air. Mrs. Park emerged from the kitchen, her face lighting up when she saw Jasmine. "There you are.
Come, come.
Dinner first, business after. You can't make important decisions on an empty stomach." Over dinner, Jean laid it all out. The legitimate businesses that fronted for money laundering, the protection rackets, the illegal gambling operations, the drug trade he'd inherited but was slowly phasing out, the violence he'd committed, the people he'd hurt, the moral lines he'd crossed so many times he'd stopped counting. "I'm trying to go legitimate," he said, his voice raw. "It's taking years, but I'm moving everything legal. For my mother. For Ji-young. For any future I might have that doesn't end with me dead in an alley." "And for yourself?" Jasmine asked. Jin's eyes found hers. "I didn't think I had a reason to want something different. Until I met you." Mrs. Park reached across the table and took both of their hands. "Life is not simple," she said gently. "Good people make bad choices. Bad choices can lead to good outcomes. My son is not perfect, but he has a good heart buried under all that armor. And you, Jasmine, you have the strength to help him remember it's still there." After dinner, Jean took Jasmine to his study and showed her everything: financial records, business operations, security protocols. He held nothing back, and with every revelation, Jasmine felt the weight of what choosing him would mean. She'd be choosing danger, choosing complexity, choosing a life where she'd constantly worry if he'd come home alive. But she'd also be choosing a man who loved with devastating completeness, who would protect her with his last breath, who looked at her like she was the light in his darkness. "I can't promise you easy," Jean said, standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I can't promise you safe. I can only promise you everything I am, the good, the bad, and the ugly. All of it. Completely. Forever." Jasmine took a deep breath. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Of your world, of what could happen, of losing myself in this. But I'm more terrified of walking away and spending the rest of my life wondering what we could have been." She stepped closer, placing her hand over his heart, feeling it thunder beneath her palm. "So here's what I need from you. Full honesty, always. No protecting me from the truth. I'm strong enough to handle reality. I'm not strong enough to handle lies." "Done," Jean said immediately. "And I need you to respect my work, my career. Medicine is part of who I am. I won't give that up. I would never ask you to. Your passion for helping people is one of the things I love most about you. And when things get hard, and they will, you have to promise me you won't shut me out. That you'll let me in even when every instinct tells you to protect me by pushing me away." Jean cupped her face in his hands, his eyes intense. "I promise. All of it. Anything you need. Anything you want. It's yours." "Then kiss me," Jasmine whispered. "Kiss me like you mean it. Like this is real, and we're going to figure it out together." Jean kissed her like she was air, and he'd been suffocating. Deep and desperate, and full of promise. Jasmine melted into him, into this dangerous choice, into the terrifying possibility of love that could either save them both or burn them to ashes. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jean pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you," he said roughly. "I know it's too soon, I know I shouldn't say it yet, but I do. I love you, Jasmine. Completely. Desperately. In ways that probably aren't healthy but are entirely true." "I know," Jasmine said, her heart full to bursting. "I feel it too. It's terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely insane. But it's real. We're real." From the doorway, Mrs. Park's delighted voice rang out. "Finally. I told you, Jean. I told you fate would bring you someone special. Now, when's the wedding?" "Mom," Jean groaned, but he was smiling, genuinely smiling, and Jasmine started laughing. This was her life now. Dangerous. Complicated. Unpredictable. but also full of a love so fierce it took her breath away. Full of a man who would burn the world down to keep her safe. Full of possibility and hope and the promise of something extraordinary. 6 months later, Jasmine stood in Jin's study reviewing financial records for his legitimate businesses. She'd become his conscience, his advisor, the person who reminded him there were lines he didn't have to cross anymore. Together, they were building something different, a life that honored where he'd come from while reaching for something better. Jin walked in and wrapped his arms around her from behind, pressing a kiss to her temple. Come to bed. It's late. 5 more minutes. I'm almost done with these reports. Doctor's orders, he teased. Crime lord's girlfriend's orders, she corrected, leaning back into his embrace. Actually, Jean said softly, turning her to face him. He pulled out a small velvet box and Jasmine's breath caught. I was hoping for crime lord's fiancé. If you'll have me. All of me. Forever. The ring was perfect, elegant but not ostentatious, exactly her style. Jasmine looked at this man who'd changed her entire world, who'd shown her that love wasn't about perfection but about choosing someone completely, flaws and all. Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes to all of it. To you, to us, to this beautiful, complicated, dangerous life we're building together. Jean slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her like she was his salvation. And maybe she was. Maybe they were saving each other, one dangerous choice at a time. Mrs. Park's shriek of joy from down the hallway told them she'd been listening at the door. I'm planning the wedding, she shouted. Finally, I get to plan my son's wedding. Jasmine laughed through her tears, and Jean pulled her close, holding her like she was precious, like she was everything. This was their story. Not perfect, not easy, but entirely theirs. A beautiful doctor and a dangerous man who found each other in the most unlikely place and chose love despite every reason not to. Chose hope over fear. Chose each other over safety. And in the end, that choice saved them both. If this story captured your heart, if you felt every moment of tension and every spark of connection, show some love by hitting that like button. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have made the same choice as Jasmine? Would you risk everything for a love this intense? And if you want more stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat, stories about impossible love and dangerous choices, and the courage it takes to choose your heart over your head, then subscribe right now. Because life's too short for safe choices and boring stories. Until next time, remember, the best love stories are the ones that scare you a little.